Calen knew that his life was forfeit the moment he felt the cold, unnatural vibration of the forbidden bell. In the City of Silent Chimes, sound is not merely heard, it is forged. Every whisper, every scream, and every lullaby ever uttered hangs from the rafters of the great cathedral as a shimmering silver bell. But one bell was never meant to be rung. It was cast from the metal of a dying star and buried beneath 3 layers of holy salt. Calen reached out, his fingers trembling, and as his skin brushed the obsidian surface, a sound erupted that did not just ring, it tore the very fabric of the world apart. The sound was not a chime, it was a void. Suddenly, every silver bell in the cathedral shattered into fine grey dust. Calen watched in horror as his own shadow detached itself from his feet and fled into the darkness. But the true terror was yet to come. He turned to scream for help, but no sound left his throat. Outside, the entire city had fallen into a deathly, unnatural silence. The birds froze in midair, the waterfalls turned to glass, and the people of the city stood like statues, their mouths open in silent, invisible screams. The silence had arrived, and it was hungry. From the wreckage of the silver dust, a mechanical creature emerged. It was a great owl, constructed from rusted brass and ticking gears, its eyes glowing with a fierce emerald light. It did not speak with words, for words were now extinct, but it projected images directly into Calen's mind. It showed him a spire made of solidified echoes, located at the very edge of the world. If Calen did not reach that spire before the final echo of the forbidden bell faded, the silence would become permanent. The world would not end in fire, it would end in a whisper that no one could hear. The owl took flight, and Calen followed, sprinting through the outskirts of the city. As they crossed the border, the ground changed from stone to a desert of broken mirrors. Each shard reflected a different version of the past. Calen saw himself as a child, then as an old man, and then as a king. The silence began to take shape behind them, manifesting as a wall of ink-black smoke that erased the horizon. It did not move, it simply expanded, consuming the reflections and the sky. Calen realized that he was not just running for his life, he was running for his very memory. They reached the bridge of vibrating light, a narrow path that hummed with the last remnants of music. Below the bridge lay the abyss of forgotten names, a swirling whirlpool of grey mist. Calen stepped onto the bridge, and the light flared. Every step he took felt like a hammer blow against his heart. The silence sent its hunters, wraiths made of soundless static, to intercept him. They had no faces, only vibrating holes where their features should be. Calen drew a small silver tuning fork from his belt, the only weapon he had left against the encroaching void. He struck the tuning fork against the bridge, and a wave of pure golden resonance erupted. The wraiths shattered like glass, their static bodies dissolving into the mist, but the bridge began to crack under the force of the sound. Calen leaped for the far shore, his fingers catching the jagged rock of the spire's base just as the bridge vanished into the abyss. He was now at the foot of the Spire of Echoes. It was a tower of crystal, a mile high, vibrating with the trapped voices of every soul that had ever lived. It was the heart of all sound. The entrance to the spire was guarded by the blind weaver, a giant spider-like being with the torso of a woman weaving a web of golden threads. These threads were not silk, they were the heartstrings of the universe. To enter, she projected into his mind, you must give up your own voice forever. To save the world's sound, you must become eternally silent. Calen looked back at the wall of black smoke, now only moments away. He did not hesitate. He stepped forward and placed his hand upon the weaver's golden loom, feeling his voice leave his body like a bird taking flight. Weaver stepped aside, and the doors of the spire swung open. Calen climbed the internal spiral staircase, passing galleries of sound. He saw rooms filled with the laughter of children, the roar of ancient battles, and the whispers of lovers. Each room was a sanctuary of a different frequency, but as he climbed, the silence began to seep through the crystal walls. The black smoke was trying to suffocate the echoes. Calen reached the summit, where a single golden hammer hung above a massive, empty bell frame. He realized that he was the bell. Calen stood in the center of the frame. The mechanical owl landed on his shoulder, its emerald eyes dimming. "Strike," it whispered in his mind. Calen grasped the golden hammer. He had no voice to scream, no breath to cry out, but he had the resolve of a world that refused to be quiet. He swung the hammer with all his remaining strength, striking his own chest. Instead of blood, a fountain of pure, crystalline music erupted from his heart. The sound was so powerful that it shattered the roof of the spire and sent a shockwave across the entire planet. The golden wave hit the wall of silence and tore it to shreds. The ink-black smoke evaporated into nothingness. Across the world, the glass waterfalls shattered back into liquid, and the frozen people took their first breath in hours. In the City of Silent Chimes, the silver bells began to ring in a symphony of celebration. But at the Spire of Echoes, there was a heavy cost. Calen did not die, but he was no longer human. He had become the new bell of the world, a guardian of sound whose very heartbeat kept the silence at bay. The mechanical owl remained by his side, its brass feathers now polished and bright. Together, they watched as the first new sounds of the world reached the spire. A mother's song, a distant thunderstorm, the rustle of wind through the marble trees. Calen could not speak, but he could hear everything. He realized that the forbidden bell had not been a weapon of destruction, but a test. The world had grown too loud, too full of meaningless noise, and it needed a soul brave enough to value silence before it could truly hear again. But deep in the abyss of forgotten names, something stirred. The silence was not defeated, it was merely sleeping. A single shard of the obsidian bell remained, glowing with a faint, malevolent light. It began to vibrate in a frequency that was the opposite of Calen's song. A new shadow began to grow, one that did not belong to a person, but to the world itself. Calen felt the vibration through the floor of the spire. He knew that his vigil had only just begun. The war between sound and silence would last for eternity. Calen stood from his crystal throne, his new body humming with power. He reached out and grabbed the golden hammer once more. He would not wait for the enemy to come to him. He stepped off the edge of the spire, not falling, but walking upon the air as if it were a solid floor. Each step he took created a soft, musical note that echoed through the valley. The mechanical owl spread its wings and screeched a brassy battle cry. They were no longer the hunted, they were the hunters of the void. As he descended into the grey mists of the abyss, the sounds of the world followed him like an invisible army. He heard the prayers of the priests in the cathedral and the cheers of the children in the streets. He realized that he was never alone. Every sound ever made was a part of him now. He raised the golden hammer, and it began to glow with the light of 1,000 suns. "I am the echo," he thought, and the thought was so powerful it shook the foundations of the earth itself. The final confrontation began at the edge of the obsidian shard. Calen brought the hammer down with the force of a falling star. The explosion of sound and light was so great that it was heard in the dreams of every living creature. The shard shattered into a million harmless pieces, and the darkness was finally truly extinguished. Calen looked up at the sky, which was now filled with a shimmering aurora of every color imaginable. The world was safe, the music was restored, and the bell of the Unmaking was now a bell of eternal life. Centuries later, the people of Oakhaven still tell the story of the boy who stole the silence. They say that if you listen closely to the wind on a quiet night, you can still hear the heartbeat of the crystal spire. They no longer fear the shadows, for they know that as long as the heartbeat continues, the world will never be silent again. Calen remains on his vigil, the eternal artisan of sound, ensuring that every whisper, every laugh, and every song finds its way home to the cathedral of the stars.